Thank you very much for your invitation to talk about adapting circular economy to the built environment. And I'll explain this within the overall need to rethink, reduce and reuse. And actually, it's great to hear that Vancouver is a leader in taking action to reduce body carbon, and Adelaide in South Australia can learn from you and perhaps collaborate and with other cities. My slides actually repeat some of the topics covered by Hannah and Benjamin, so I will try to skip over those areas more quickly. Thank you. Okay. Climate change and carbon is part of a bigger picture, including the other UN Sustainable Development Goals. Human impact on the planet has caused serious degradation of many other natural systems, which has been mentioned. So we are now in a new geological epoch called the Anthropocene. As a leading Australian scientist, Professor Will Steffen said, the single biggest factor was actually resource consumption. And did you know that we have produced enough concrete to pave the whole planet 2 millimeters thick? So imagine that, all that resource consumption. And Professor Steffen also emphasised that 18% of the population drives 84% of such global consumption. So there's a big inequity issue, which I'll talk more about. But reusing goods and products in closed loops, by reusing goods and products in closed loops, the circular economy can help reduce consumption and hence embodied carbon. But this is not enough. We must also make dramatic cuts in our demand and consumption to rethink and reduce. As circular economy founder, Professor Walter Starhill wrote in 2008, reducing resource consumption always reduces carbon emissions. I have noticed in the Leadership Forum and elsewhere that most efforts to reduce carbon in building seem concentrated at the materials level. But I will argue that we need to lift our thinking to a higher level in order to make the drastic changes required to meet the climate emergency and the other global goals. So in terms of rethink and reduce, I'll also talk about retrofit and especially building less and even building nothing. Professor Walter Starhill also wrote about tackling climate change in 2008. The key issue at stake is unbalanced resource consumption on a global level, an issue of global ethics. And this is evident from this diagram from the UN Emissions Gap Report of 2020. It stresses that we are not on track to attain the target of a 1.5 degree temperature rise by 2050. And the diagram on the right shows absolute consumption emissions for 4 global income groups. The top 1% of the population in red, you can see their emissions there, and the top 10% in purple, 48% emissions, and then you can see that the middle income earners, their emissions constitute 44%, but this really stands out. The bottom 50% of income earners in green, their emissions are only 7%. So there's a big disparity there. And going on the left, the diagram on the left, it shows how much we will reduce consumption-based carbon by 2030 for a 1.5 degrees centigrade to rise. In red, the wealthiest 1% of the population must reduce their consumption emissions by a factor of 30, which is a staggering 97%, to get to this baseline, which is a per capita, global average per capita consumption target. So you can see the red has to go right down, 97% reduction. And that 1% is not just the super rich, it's actually many of us. Most of Australia, or many people in Australia, fall into that category. And similarly, you can see for the top 10%, they also have to make a big reduction. And all this will enable poorer societies, particularly the bottom 50%, to increase their emissions because they need more infrastructure and facilities. But turning to the built environment and embodied carbon, it's already been mentioned about the importance of buildings and infrastructure in terms of consumption of resources and waste and emissions. And it's the most important sector. And to meet a net zero carbon goal, the Global Alliance for Building and Construction reports that we are not on track either, largely due to growth in floor area, which surpasses energy efficiency improvements. This requires a 60 to 70% reduction in carbon by 2030, less than 9 years away. But similar to the UN diagram, arguably more should be achieved in wealthier societies. Attention is now turning, as has been mentioned, to consumption-based emissions, including embodied. Consumption-based emissions of C40 cities for climate change, of which Vancouver is one, are 60% more than operational, 60%. This is due to 2/3 of their goods imported by these consuming cities from producing cities in poorer parts of the world. So as Maria Smith wrote in the Architects Journal recently, poor nations are burdened by rich nations' high embodied carbon. C40 cities also argues that consumption emissions in consuming cities must decrease 2/3 by 2030. But it is a ray of light. Vancouver aims to reduce embodied carbon by 40% by 2030. And this provides an opportunity to lead massive changes in approaches. The circular economy. The circular economy is closely related to the concept of eco or resource efficiency, which has been around for a very long time, where more services or prosperity could be gained from less resources, more from less. It was put forward as an alternative to the linear economy that involves take, make, and waste. And these days, it is seen as gaining more value from goods and products by extending their useful life and keeping them in closed loops, especially by their reuse. Now, this diagram, and I noticed that Benjamin, I think it was, showed the right-hand part, which is for technical materials or in building products. The left side of the diagram covers biological materials, which, as Hannah mentioned, includes timber. But this diagram comes from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and I have some concerns about it. But first of all, you can see that the smaller the loop is better, maintaining and then reusing buildings and parts of buildings, and recycling on the periphery is less preferred. But there is one thing that is missing, and that is reduce and rethink. So we need, from what I've said before in the UN diagram, we need to reduce the resource consumption coming in. We can recycle, try to recycle and keep products in closed loops, but that is not a silver bullet. We can't do that 100%. We can only do that up to 40 or 50%. So to make the big changes in resource consumption, we need to reduce consumption. But in circular economy circles, sorry for the term, but circular economy circles in Australia and elsewhere, my experience is that most of the talk is about recycling. Hardly gets mentioned, and it's good to hear in this discussion that reuse is being discussed. Adapting the circular economy to the built environment. Benjamin has already mentioned some of this, but I'll just quickly go over. I was attracted to the notion of resource efficiency and circular economy in the early 2000s. I conducted research with Interface Floor and Hewlett-Packard on reuse of their products, especially in modular form, which is when I first encountered the idea, which Benjamin's also mentioned, the idea of a service economy, providing products as a service, which facilitated their take back and reuse. Now, there are several key principles, which I've highlighted here. Firstly, in the 1990s, Stuart Brand devised the idea of layers of change in buildings, called the 6 S's. And you can see here, this is quite an important concept, which relates very much to what Benjamin was saying about disassembly. So the 6 S's are the site, and then the structure of the building in dark blue, the skin or the facade, the services, the space plan, and the stuff is all the furniture and whatever that goes inside buildings. And also, in terms of life, of course, the structure lasts usually a lot longer. And there are opportunities, especially in the space planning and fit outs and whatever, for increased reuse. The next concept is open building, which is about having a longer life structure and replaceable, reusable infill, which fosters design for disassembly. There is actually an open building network, you may not be aware. So we should really design for disassembly and change. I totally agree with Benjamin. So the future building stock can be easier to adapt. And next we have the idea of separate ownership of the base building and the movable infill. Imagine if buildings could be constructed like a large Lego set, with the parts being reused over and over again, especially via service and take-back agreements. And this is already happening in parts of the world. So that completely changes like real estate. So real estate becomes like the base building, and all the movable parts get provided as a service. And actually Arup constructed the first circular building, a demountable pavilion at the London Pavilion in 2016. You can see the picture there, and you'll note that sort of replicates the idea of brand, the shape. And you can see how the building can be all taken apart and reused, like Benjamin was saying. But digitally enabled reuse of building components. As an architect, I was most interested in the application of these concepts to the built environment. This led me to be awarded the Arup 2017 Global Research Challenge to adapt the circular economy to the built environment. This involved adapting a lot of actually existing technologies, including BIM, which has been mentioned, and RFID tags, which you have on your luggage. And our UniSA and Arup team succeeded in establishing a cyber physical connection. We were able to put tags on, you can see like an RFID tag there. We were able to put tags on parts of a case study building, including the fit outs, the doors, the ceiling panels, and the glazed window panels, and even the facade panels. This thing could be managed and monitored remotely and exchanged between various users. So this led to us establishing a prototype. It's only a prototype, but we proved this could all work. A prototype Cloud-BIM platform for reuse of components as a service. The most interesting part of this was the idea of providing components via service contracts, whereby the supplier maintains ownership and stewardship responsibilities over their life, quite similar to rental or leasing. We explored the feasibility of this approach, especially with a supplier of glazed framed window panels. This revealed that there are some barriers needed to be overcome, such as establishing a market, where most of the market is for new products, and providing products as a service. There's a need to amortize the initial manufacturing cost over time. And also there's a great need for increased modularization and standardization. And I'll just briefly describe this here. You can see this is one building and this is another. And we used RFID tags and connected to BIM. And then we were able to connect to the cloud, a Cloud-BIM object library, and a Cloud-BIM model of the building, which is a duplicate of the physical model. And then another designer of another building could, looking for a component, could find them on the cloud platform, could locate them, and then could actually import them into their new BIM model. So we showed that could all work, and we created the prototype platform. But if you're interested in knowing more, there's a link there with a video. It's about a 15, 20-minute video. But as I said, oh, by the way, I should say, we still need to take that previous work further and find support and investment. So please let me know if you're interested. For example, we need to link with smart sensors, which have the potential to enable online real-time management and monitoring of the condition and performance of assets. But after all that work with the Arup project, which was based on reuse, I realised that circularity and reuse is not enough to meet the global targets, as I said, especially when demand and consumption increases. While reuse is positive, we must also lift our sights to reduce and reconsider or rethink. So to achieve the huge shift in reducing our consuming less and with less carbon, absolute consumption of resources used in building must be reduced, especially in more industrialised societies like Australia and Canada and the US, where growth, well, actually in Australia, the growth is, in my city, it's fairly slow, and supply is saturated. So I want to emphasise that area covered in red. I think Hannah has already mentioned this diagram. It's from the UK Infrastructure Carbon Review in 2013. That's 8 years ago. And you can see that building clever, such as I've described, and reuse, can only save up to around about 50% of carbon, including the use of low carbon materials, and which is well short of the drastic cuts required, which is about 60 to 70%, which leads me to emphasise that we need to concentrate on building less, as has been mentioned, maximising the use of existing assets, and also build nothing, as Hannah also mentioned, where if we build nothing and find alternative approaches, then we can get 100% saving. So this includes questioning the need to build at all and the build nothing option. And some researchers, such as Professor Julian Allwood of Cambridge University, have urged more questioning of demand. And he wrote, "Reducing service demand is the gold medal of modern materials management." But building nothing or building much less may seem impossible to many people, but COVID-19 has changed everything. It's changed everything. We can see how many services and transactions are being provided online by digitalisation with less need for real estate, as we're showing right. So we need to build less new to cut most carbon. Question mark, do we? I think we do. I'll just quickly go across this, but the slide shows the huge Barangaroo development in Sydney. But despite being 5.27 million square feet in floor area, it still attained a green rating, the highest, and claims 20% reduction in carbon, which is not enough, I don't believe, and is said to be carbon neutral on operational terms, but that's quite misleading. And in North America, Bill Gates, he wrote that on his blog, buildings are bad for the climate. And he actually mentioned embodied carbon, Bill Gates. But at the same time, Microsoft was constructing its new headquarters in Washington with 17 new buildings totaling 6.7 million square feet. So I hope you get the picture. In my city, Adelaide, I won't go into that, but we're also continuing to build big, although our population growth is very low, and we should not be. We should be reusing the existing stock. And there's huge vacancy rate. So should we not question all this in richer cities all over the world, especially whether new structures are really required and their impact on consumption-based embodied carbon, which, bear in mind, as I said before, this also comes from other producing countries. This led our research team at UniSA to approach the Green Building Council of Australia to rethink benchmarks and metrics for carbon footprints. With Arup as a partner, we prepared a preliminary report, which we hope it will be released later this year. But we revealed some differences regarding carbon footprints in the rating system, the green rating system. And by using scenario analysis, we showed that working from home could substantially reduce the need for new office space in CBDs, reduce transport emissions, and provide a way to meet tightening carbon budgets. And actually, we posed the question to the Green Building Council: how will you reward owners and clients who build less or not at all? Because green rating tools only apply if you build, and fail to account properly for retrofitting or embodied carbon. So some takeaway messages. Digitally enabled reuse, such as by the Arup project, can save around 40 to 50% carbon, I believe. But more is required. Reduce and rethink can save 80 to 100%. So we need to challenge the need, build less, and find other ways to achieve outcomes. COVID-19 digitalisation has shown what's possible, with remote work leading to the less need for real estate. And going back to what I was saying before about equity, we need to shrink new builds in wealthier societies so that the disadvantaged parts of the world can grow their services and infrastructure. And finally, we need to rethink rating tools. Vancouver's aim to cut 40% carbon by 2030 is admirable. Reuse is essential, but also I suggest rethink and reduce new floor space, regenerate and make better use of what we have. And just a final remark, I read recently that world cities would add over 64 billion square feet of new floor space to their building stock every year, equivalent to adding an entire New York City to the planet every 34 days. And the person who wrote that suggested the way to tackle that is to change material manufacturing and to use new building materials. But as I've been saying, that at materials level is not far enough. Should we not question whether all this floor space is actually required, especially in the industrialised world where growth is slower, but developing countries are growing much faster and need resources. So there's some further reading there if you have time. And I wrote a book about this too. But thank you, and I'm sorry I might have gone a bit over my time.